Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. This is another discussion about Brené Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart. It's been out now for almost a year, I suppose, because we're getting towards the end of 2022. And we're on chapter 10, and it is the places that we go when our heart is open. And if you're like me, you might be thinking of that as a positive thing when you think, oh, open your heart. You know, it sounds like such a loving, wonderful thing, right? And last time in chapter 9, we talked about connection and how when we're searching for connection, there were some good things and some bad things, right, that could come from that. Like if you felt like you didn't belong and things like that. Well, this one, again, you kind of, at least I feel like you get this message from life sometimes that you should have your heart open. And I said in the last video that I sort of struggle with that just due to my own experiences thus far in my life. And listen to the words that Brené tells us about for your heart being open. Of course, love, right? But then we have lovelessness, heartbreak, trust is good, I suppose. Self-trust is also good. Betrayal, defensiveness, flooding, and hurt. So ultimately, I went into this chapter thinking like, oh, it's going to be lovely, the places that we go when our heart is open. But like in some other chapters, there's some not so happy words in this one, right? So of course, I think love is a wonderful word, and hopefully that is a positive in your mind. I think what's interesting is that the research that they did as they were going through these emotions and the words that they were studying is that there was some sort of like a rub about whether love is actually a thing or whether it's an emotion. I think what they determined is that people perceive it as an emotion. So like they did some studies and found that like 90% of people do consider love to be an emotion. So that's how they're looking at it. But there's debate among researchers, she says. So I'm going to read a few things about love. And I think when you think of love, you probably think of other things like she mentions in here, vulnerability. And that's a big thing in Brené's work. So we cultivate love when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be deeply seen and known, and when we honor the spiritual connection that grows from that offering with trust, respect, kindness, and affection. Is that not beautiful? It is. Love is not something we give or get. It's something that we nurture and grow. A connection that can be cultivated between two people only when it exists within each one of them. Interesting, huh? Because we know about unrequited love, so there could be love there, but it's not going to be the connection if there's just a one-sided feeling. Let's see. So it can be cultivated between people when it exists within each of them. We can love others only as much as we love ourselves. Remember, that's my least favorite sort of statement. I talked about this last year in the Madly in Love with Me book. What do you think about that? I think a few comments came in on that when I explained my displeasure about that comment, that we can love others only as much as we love ourselves. I have thought about this one a lot, even since I talked to you guys about it last time, because I said that it bothered me that if you're someone that struggles with self-love, like a lot of people do, then that's disheartening when people say something like, you won't know love until you can love yourself. And then my statement was, well, I think you can love others without necessarily loving yourself as much as you would like to. But in thinking about that, I was thinking about the fact that if you have a major lack of love for yourself, then the love that you're probably looking for from someone else is not necessarily a pure, healthy love, because you may be looking for them to fill a void within you. But I don't agree with the statement that you can't know love unless you love yourself. I do still think you can have the capacity to love others, but yeah, there could be like a taintedness to it, or something that needs to be worked on. Shame, blame, disrespect, betrayal, and the withholdings of affection damage the roots from which love grows. Love can survive these injuries only if they're acknowledged, healed, and rare. That's true, because so much of what we believe about love and affection and what we may deserve in terms of being worthy of it come from our experiences early on. And then, as we know, life continues to show us maybe our worst fears, maybe our greatest aspirations, but you're only going to see validation of some of the things that you believe, even if they're not true. So if you are constantly thinking that you're not lovable, then you probably will have more evidence of that. And then it makes things worse, right? So it's good if you can have a nice foundation of that love early on. And so much of that comes from having a stable family life, which not everybody comes from. And not everybody has parents that really even know how to give love, or how to like parent in a way where they're validating something that they might not understand. Like if somebody is very different from them, or if they had an idea of what it meant for somebody to measure up, then they might have withheld their love. So yeah, there can be shame, there can be blame. You can feel betrayed by a caretaker in some cases, and you might not even identify these things until later in life, after you've started to really look at some issues. Brené says we need more real love, gritty, dangerous, wild-eyed, justice-seeking love. So yeah, you have to have an open heart to give love and receive it. Because I would say if your heart is not open, then you're definitely not going to be receptive to it. But I don't know that you could really give it fully if that is sort of like turned off in a way. If you know about the chakras, like if you think about your heart can actually be blocked or not spinning with the energy that all the other chakras are spinning with, and that can be something that you can work on with energy healing. So Brené says it's always a risk to define a term like love. She has that in quotes. I personally think it might be best left to the poets, artists, and rock singers, probably. However, a definition did emerge from our research that's withstood the test of time. And those are the things that I just read earlier, the 3 verses that I just talked about. I like what Brené says here too, because I think this is really true, because love is going to be so personal for everybody as well. She says, I'll confess that I don't think we'll ever be able to fully unravel the mysteries of love, or, to be honest, many of the other emotions that we experience. At least I hope not. I think attempting to better understand ourselves and each other is essential, but so is the mystery. So that's an interesting statement, considering that this whole book is about our feelings and the research that they did to sort of narrow down a definition of a lot of these things. But I like that she's open to saying, it's all a mystery, and that she doesn't feel like she's ready to unravel them, and maybe that's a good thing. Of course, we have like a cause and effect, right? So if you have love, you could have lovelessness. I mentioned unrequited love. You could have a lack of love as you're growing up, like I mentioned. You could have just such a closed heart that you are just not open to any sort of love. And that can just be like even the love of enjoying anything. Brené says, I don't want to betray my mind or heart. I want to live by a love ethic. We need more love between us, but also among us. Not rainbow and unicorn love or commercialized love. And this is that other statement. We need more real love. Gritty, dangerous, wide-eyed, justice-seeking love. It is exciting when you think about, of course, like the first love of your life and how you probably loved with just wild abandon, and you weren't worried, you weren't tainted, you didn't have that closed heart. Unless you really grew up with trauma, you might have had a closed heart, but you probably loved more deeply for that first time than you might ever again. I suppose love changes over time, though. And there's lots of different kinds of love. She doesn't go too deep into that, but there's many books about love and many people that have studied it. So, of course, we think about our heart as the center of love, right? We say like, oh, I love you with all my heart, or we're talking about having an open heart here. So what do you think about heartbreak? Do you think that's a real thing? We talked about things like devastation, grief, depression, other things in this book so far. And heartbreak could be a part of a lot of that. It could be like the basis of why you're depressed. It could be how you feel when you are having the loss of someone in your life, when we talked about the loss chapter. So you may feel like even more than your heart is broken, you might just feel like you are completely broken. Or you might feel like you can pinpoint a certain moment in your life where things broke and they were never the same. And I think that is part of being a human, as hard as it is to say that. Speaking of that, I want to recommend a documentary that was recommended to me, and I did get a lot out of it. Jonah Hill, he's an actor. You've probably seen him in Superbad and some other comedy things that he's done serious films too as well. But he just put out a documentary about his therapist. And I thought it was really worth passing on, that I think anybody with a brain or a heart would really benefit from watching that, because just what I just said, where it's like, heartbreak is a part of life. Sometimes therapists will just gloss over things and try to be like, oh, it's going to be fine. You'll get to a day where you'll never remember this and stuff. But one thing I really appreciate about his therapist was that he did say, even a couple of times in the documentary, something like, that's going to be something that you're going to be dealing with for the rest of your life. And in some respects you could be like, what? I'm going to be heartbroken for my whole life, like if that's your thing. But he had a real reality check on a lot of things. I'm sure that I would love to read his book too. He's been involved with writing about some of the topics that he discusses in that documentary. So definitely put it on your list. It's in Netflix right now, and I don't remember the name of it. But if you look up Jonah Hill documentary, it'll come up. And it was recommended on a podcast I was listening to, and I checked it out last week, and I probably will watch it again too, because he had some concepts in there that were really of benefit when you're thinking about healing, or about like maybe the dark sides of your life that are ever present, or like you're always trying to overcome. So anyway, just a plug for that. And heartbreak was definitely something that was spoken about in that documentary. She does mention here it can come from being rejected. It can be about something that you really thought was going to happen and didn't happen. It doesn't necessarily have to be about love. It could be about any kind of loss. The death of a loved one, obviously, that one is heartbreaking. And even if she says, even if you didn't expect someone to live forever, it's like death is no one's fault, but your heart is broken anyway. A related heartbreak is the death of something unique. So, like I said, it could be a lifestyle. It could be that you wanted to have children and you never had them, or you wanted your kids to stay children all the time. She said, but at times the loss of innocence was heartbreaking. Yeah, for sure. Heartbreak is what happens when love is lost. That's the definition of heartbreak. Okay, so here's the real thing of it. If your heart's going to be open, then you are opening yourself up for the potential of the heart to be broken, correct? Are you willing to risk that? I shared with you last time, I was like, I'd like another heartbreak would end me. So is my heart open? No. But I do agree with Brené's teachings of like, if you are going to live a wholehearted life, then like that's something that I would have to work on, because otherwise I will have loneliness and the things that we talked about in the last chapter. Every time we love, we risk heartbreak, she says. Despite how lonely heartbreak feels, it is universal. Like I said, it's about like being a human. And she talks about how even if we haven't experienced the same exact heartbreak as someone, we all have the capacity to understand, just like with the grief and that one chapter that we talked about where it was like you could empathize with someone or you could sympathize. If we all think about the fact that we are human and this is something that comes along with being human and having the human experience, then we can still offer I don't know if it's sympathies, because I forget which one was better, to offer your sympathy or your empathy. I think it was empathy was better, but we can put ourselves in the other person's shoes and know that heartbreak really is really devastating. It's very, very hard. But Brené says the heartbroken are the bravest among us because they dared to love. What about trust? Trust is definitely something that when you open your heart, you have to have an open heart to trust, I would say too, because you're not going to be very trustworthy if your heart is closed off, because you probably have a lot of reasons to feel like the world is not a trustworthy place. Trust is more of a cognitive assessment than an emotion, Brené says. But as we all know, conversations about trust can bring up a lot of emotions, especially hurt and defensiveness. That's true. Like, what if somebody's accusing you of betraying their trust? I really had to think about this. She said this in the Braving book, and she puts it here again as the acronym. I really had to think about, like, am I a trustworthy person? When you think about all these things here. Like, do you have boundaries? Are you reliable? So these are the Braving acronyms. Do you have accountability? Can you, like, keep things in the vault? That's the V part of Braving. I is integrity. Non-judgment is the N, and generosity is the G. I would recommend on 192, that's the page that these letters and words are on. I would recommend reading the little few sentences that she has about each of the words. So also she has this, the training program, because she has a book called Dare to, I think she has Dare to Love, but she has a training program she mentions here, Dare to Lead. And when she brings that to organizations, she says this is one of the most adopted tools, the Braving thing about trust. Because if you're going to be on a team, you really have to rely on other people. It doesn't have to just be in a loving relationship, but as a human, you would want to likely aspire to be a trustworthy person with those things in there, like with the reliability, accountability, integrity, things like that. I would think those would be a positive. We most often think about trust between people and groups, but we often forget about the importance of self-trust. So that was another one of the words in this chapter. Self-trust is normally the first casualty or failure of mistakes. We stop trusting ourselves when we hurt others, get hurt, feel shame, or question our worth. That's true. So, as I said in my own life, like as the years have gone by, life can either show you more of what you want or don't want. And if you already have some issues around self-trust, then you're probably going to continue to be just as closed off if you don't work on those issues. What about betrayal? That would be like the opposite of trust, right? If you thought you could trust somebody and then they betrayed you. Betrayal is so painful because at its core, it's a violation of trust. That's what Brené said the definition is here. When we're injured by betrayal, we suffer high levels of anxiety, depression, anger, sadness, jealousy, decreased self-worth, embarrassment, humiliation, shame, and even trauma. It's pretty bad. She also mentioned defensiveness as one of the words, right? And think about the fact that, I'm going to go back to the beginning there, because she doesn't have it in bold like she normally does, but we're getting into the defensiveness part, but it's not yet bold here where she's talking about betrayal. But you could get very defensive if you feel like you're being betrayed, or if you're trying to hold up your honor, or you're feeling like you have integrity, but somebody else is betraying that, or acting like you're betraying that. Or like, say you had something in the vault and then someone came to you and was like, I can't believe you did that. And they're questioning your character, and you just know that it's not true. Well, of course you're going to get defensive, right? Yeah. At its core, defensiveness is a way to protect our ego, our ego, and a fragile self-esteem. What about flooding? That was the last word. According to the Gottman Institute, flooding is a sensation of feeling psychologically and physically overwhelmed during conflict, making it virtually impossible to have a productive problem-solving discussion. Yeah, and there are a lot of therapy techniques about that, because that's like the best time when you're feeling overwhelmed like that, to be like, okay, I need a break, and sort of going back and trying to regulate your feelings, and maybe even jotting down some things before you come back and try to have a calm rest of that discussion. Because if you are a defensive person, like I happen to be a defensive person, I know that, and I'm also susceptible to this flooding as she describes it, then if I don't take a moment, then I'm gonna throw all of my defensiveness out there, or say something that I might regret. Yeah, again, that's all about being human too, I think. And then just in general, this word could go back with the heartbroken, but hurt could be for so many reasons. The definition of hurt from a team of researchers goes a long way to explaining why acknowledging hurt is so difficult. They write, individuals who are hurt experience a combination of sadness at having been emotionally wounded and fear of being vulnerable to harm. When people feel hurt, they have appraised something that someone did or said as causing them emotional pain. Yeah. So the fallout was hurtful. And then in terms of that self-trust, if you're hurt and you really did feel like you had trust for yourself, and then it resulted in hurt, then that can also make the self-trust worse, right? Yeah. Oh, and Brené's talking about the timeout. She says, I've never once regretted calling a timeout at home or at work. Not once. I've never experienced a little time and space being a bad thing. But I have plenty of regrets the other way around. Yeah, me too, Brené. Our hurt feelings are typically simultaneously experienced with other emotions, such as sadness, anger, anxiety, jealousy, or loneliness. As a result, they don't always feel the same way as most other emotions do. That would make sense because they're a mixture of things. However, research indicates that even though hurt feelings are a mixture of several emotions, they are distinct emotional experiences, not just a combination of other negative emotions. That's interesting. She says, as I was explaining this to my son, all I could come up with was it was like a rainbow snow cone analogy. There's grape, cherry, lime, lemon, orange, and blueberry, but you don't really taste all of those when you eat it. It just tastes like a rainbow snow cone. It's true. It's like they're all there, but you're sort of tasting a combination of it. That's a good analogy. Listen to this. This is one of the pages where she calls out a bunch of things. I'm not sure there is a braver sentence in the human catalog of brave sentences than, quote, my feelings are hurt. It's a simple, vulnerable, and honest statement. But we don't say it very often. We get pissed off or we hurt back. That is very common, right? Or we internalize the hurt until we believe we deserve it. Yeah, that can happen too. And that something is, and something, we think something's wrong with us, in other words. But rarely do we say, this really hurt my feelings. You know, if someone were to say that to you, like, it really hurt my feelings when, I could see being defensive about that, but I think that is such a vulnerable statement that it's not even a guilt trip, but it would calm, I would think, the other person down. But I think she's right. I don't think that many of us have the guts to say that. You know, we might passive aggressively try to show that, like, you hurt me and now I'm going to ignore you, or now I'm going to, like, snap at you whenever you talk. But I'm not going to ever say, like, that really hurt my feelings. Because, I don't know, saying that really hurt my feelings, it is sort of like a rhetorical statement where you're not expecting the other person to say it because you're basically just saying that to them. But it does, like, if I were to hear that, it does make me feel like I should make amends and I should apologize. And so I could see why that's hard to say. And I agree that I don't think many of us say that. One last note about hurt feelings, Brené says, unlike most other emotions, the expression, quote, hurt feelings lacks obvious synonyms. The words wounded and pained have similar connotations, but those words are typically not used to describe emotional experiences. Also, although many emotionals such as sadness or grief can be described as distressing or painful, hurt feelings seem to have more specific connotations than general emotional pain. An example might be of grief. I'm really hurting, but I probably wouldn't say, quote, her death hurt my feelings. Yeah, because it's not anybody's fault, right? It's a greater reminder of the power of language. When we're expressing emotion, it's important to differentiate experiencing hurt from having hurt feelings. That's true. So, yeah, when you say my feelings are hurt or you hurt my feelings, those are two different things. Because your feelings could be hurt about something that there was no one to blame for that. It could just be a circumstance. But saying, you hurt my feelings is different. Yeah. And that's the last thing in this chapter. Happily, we're going on to a new, happier topic in chapter 11. The places we go when life is good. Yes, finally, right? Maybe she's going to end the book with the happiest things because, boy, there's been a lot of things in this book. This book could be really good for a discussion group. I know that I've been discussing it with you, but I just think there's so many ways that we could all come together with thoughts on these emotions and experiences that we've had and statements that she makes that you can think like, yeah, I remember that was very similar to a time when such and such happened to me. So we're getting near the end of the book. We have chapters 11 and 12, and I believe there's a chapter 13 because, yep. So we'll have a 13, which is like a wrap up, a self-assessment. So we should be in line to finish up the book by the end of the year. What is chapter 12? The places we go when we feel wronged. Okay, so there's a happy one, and then there's probably a mad one in between there. We haven't talked much about anger, so I'm sure we have that to look forward to. So thank you for being here. Let me know how you're doing. I hope you are having a nice holiday season so far. Maybe you have some festive decorations up for the holidays. Let me know. And feel free to say hi. Let me know how the chapter might have brought up some feelings or thoughts for you. I love to hear from you. And thanks again for being here. Love to you all. Bye-bye.